So good morning, everybody. It's 11 a.m. here in Austin, Texas. I'm Lou Ann Dixon. I am the founder of EveryStem Florist Software, and I know many of you are already members of EveryStem, so I appreciate you jumping on here to talk about pricing. Today, my special guest is Allison Ellis, and she is the creator of a course called Flower Math, and she owns a business called Real Flower Business. And she's also a florist. So she's an active working florist. She does events and weddings. And then she also coaches other florists on business, pricing, marketing, sales, and all of the things that we need to make our businesses better. So there are two reasons I wanted to bring Allison in particular today to this group call. It's because EveryStem and Flower Math work the same way. They are both based on the fundamentals of pricing your flower, your flower costs, your supplies, your hard goods, and your flowers, and then really maximizing on the profitability of each event. So that's why I wanted to bring her here, reason number one. Reason number two is because I think that Allison brings a really unique perspective when it comes to understanding how really grasping the fundamentals of pricing and having a really secure, clear understanding of your pricing can lead to confidence in booking clients, selling, marketing, and running the every aspect of your business. It's not like an isolated thing. Pricing and understanding how you're charging your clients really does play a role in pretty much every aspect of business. So I think that Allison is a great person to really speak to that. And I'm so excited to hear all her opinions today. So thank you for being with us today, Allison.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for making an app that makes my life easier because even though I have always known how to price, EveryStem makes it faster and I recommend it literally constantly. So thank you. Right back.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad that you really enjoy using it and that you find it beneficial, because I think it's really important for people to not only have the real-time feedback that EveryStem gives you, but also kind of the time savings of being able to do this work faster. Because, as I said, Allison is a creator of Flower Math. She can do this by hand. She can do this with a calculator, but it's really about being able to speed up the process. There are some features in EveryStem, like the swap item feature and automating, some of the orders and things like that, that can make that hand, by hand process so much faster. So I think that's kind of maybe one of the things that can really make a difference when you're trying to run a business. And there are a lot of other aspects that we have to focus on.
The time saving is huge. And also, I should tell you, I don't know if I already told you this, when we did our workshop here in April, we actually priced out a bouquet with the EveryStem app. And we talked about like what this bouquet would cost. So it's really, really helpful and so easy to use. We had flowers that we had never used before because Hitomi brought them in for Japan. So I didn't have pricing on these things. As you know, anybody who does use EveryStem, it took me just minutes to put in what I needed and then to pull up the retail price of this bouquet. So it's very helpful to be able to do things quickly.
That's awesome. I
Don't
love it.
underestimate the time savings.
I love it. So one of the reasons I wanted this topic today about kind of the non-negotiables of flower pricing, understanding what needs to go into the price of our designs, and then understanding how we're getting from those costs all the way up to the price we're charging the client, is really important, because I feel like I've had a lot of people lately explaining to me or asking me, like, how does this work? How does the software get to these numbers? How do I get to these numbers in my head? Why is it not adding up for me? And so I want to make sure that we gain clarity on this, because it's such a integral part of being successful as a florist. Without pricing accurately and without really understanding the fundamentals of what we're charging our client, how can we sell that product or that service to the client. It really does make it a lot harder to actually sell something that we don't feel 100% confident on ourselves.
100% true. And price is marketing. You know, like you were saying, these things aren't, price isn't just one aspect of your business. It's a foundation of the business. It's what keeps you in business if you're profitable. But it is marketing as well. What your price is helps you position yourself in your market as well. So you have to be really confident. I'm so interested in learning more about why people are not just trusting EveryStem. They're going, these numbers don't seem right. What are they missing? So that's the point of having us here, is like, what are you unsure about? What piece are you missing that you're getting a different price than your software, which works. We all know that. But it is everything, right? It is part of your brand position. It is what will keep you in business. And the profitability piece is essential. And that's obviously what Flower Math and EveryStem are meant to do. Focus on the profit, not just how much you're selling. Because I have worked for more than a handful, more than 5 busy florists who weren't profitable. So we want to be clear about why this is so integral. We don't want to, the goal isn't to just be busy. Oh, do you know how many FTD orders we did today? Okay, but how much money did you make? That's the real question.
Exactly. So I think starting at the beginning, let's just talk about what are the non-negotiables of a floral arrangement. Let's just talk about like one floral arrangement. If we're going to sell one design to a client, I think I have 6 kind of non-negotiable things that need to be put into the price of my floral design. And, it seems pretty commonsensical, but I think it's important to kind of go over. We've got our raw materials, right? Our flowers, our supplies, our mechanics, and our hard goods. Those are very important. Obviously, those are the things that we're calling our recipe, or that we're building in EveryStem as items. But then we also have our overhead, our expenses, room for things like taxes and rent and all these things. So those are all kind of under the umbrella of like overhead and expense. And then we need to leave room for our profit, and we need to make sure that that profit can either be reinvested into our business or taken out. But we also need to leave room for payroll. Our profit can be thought of in a couple different ways, but we want to make sure that we're not taking all of our profit and putting it into our payroll. We want to make sure that our payroll is part of our kind of expenses as well, but that needs to be considered. So there's, our cost of goods sold, which are our flowers and our supplies. We've got our overhead, our expenses, our payroll, and our profit. Is that kind of what you think of too, Allison? Or is there anything else that you like to think of as far as like the things that need to be in the price of a design?
I love this conversation. So I think of it, I'm like, oh, that all makes perfect sense. If I didn't hear your answer and you just asked me what are the non-negotiables, to me, it would be obviously marking up our flowers, marking up our supplies, just like EveryStem allows you to do. I have a different markup for those things. The flowers get marked up 3 to 4. The supplies are usually 2, 2.5. My design fee, right, which is going to be the thing that pays, right? That's our labor, but my design fee is non-negotiable. Like I must have a design fee on top of every single thing that I'm making. And then obviously, so here's the thing that sometimes people get confused about: the sales tax, right? The sales tax, I'm just a pass through for it. So yes, I charge it, but it's not part of my profit margin, right? So it's like, I get it, but it's not for me. And obviously, like any kind of delivery fee that I have to apply is going to be a non-negotiable. I have got to add that to whatever order I'm doing. And that's how I kind of simplify it, that then all those non-negotiables that you mentioned come out of that profit. So that's where I'm always focused on what am I keeping? Because the amount that I'm keeping is the piece that for me is non-negotiable. It's got to be at 70% or more. Because if it's not, even if I'm down at 69%, I'm like, girl, you missed it, right? So what do I have to do to make sure that I am non-negotiable about my profit margin?
Yeah. And I think those are two ways of looking at that same thing and making sure, okay, I'm covering all these things. Because a lot of times when I first started out as a floral designer, I would get really excited about what flowers am I going to use in this design. And I would go through and I would build my recipe and it would be all flower, 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 flower. And then I would kind of get ahead of myself and start adding up, marking up the flowers and getting to my final price. And then I would realize, oops, I didn't put any of my supplies in. I didn't put my, vase in. I didn't put my whatever it is that I was going to use. And so now I'm actually undercharging. So I recently went to meet with another florist in Austin who's using EveryStem. Luckily, they invited me over to come to their shop and meet with them. And I could do it in person. They're using EveryStem and they're going through that same thing. They kind of get ahead of themselves and they don't calculate a lot of the supplies or the mechanics when they're doing some of the bigger installations. And so they're like, oh, we're kind of giving all of that away. And it's like, well, yeah, you're giving it away. You're just making less money overall because you're not thinking about those supplies.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big factor is make sure we're thinking about our supplies and then our flowers because the flowers are the sexy part. We get all excited about it. So I always like to recommend starting with those supplies. And then I've had quite a few people kind of asking about taxes lately, kind of understanding how taxes work. And I think it's important to understand that part of our profit is going to go eventually to us paying our income tax. But sales tax is something that we collect and remit to our, government entities, respectively, wherever we live in the world. But sales tax is not something that we're actually including in our profits, right? We're just kind of a conduit. We just pass that sales tax through. But we do want to make sure that our markups are high enough to cover these maybe expenses that we're not thinking about right away, like taxes that we're going to pay later on, or our overhead. A lot of designers work from home. We're not thinking about all these expenses of like, we have to pay for our water, we have to pay for our lights and all of that. So having those non-negotiables and kind of understanding what those are in your own individual business kind of ties into what markup and what design fee or labor fee are we using? Because if we're not using a high enough markup to cover all those fees that maybe we're not seeing tangibly, they're not flowers, they're not vases or hard goods, they're overhead expenses, marketing. If we're paying for to be a member of the Knot or we're paying to be in Brides of Austin magazine, that's all expenses that need to be covered in the price of our work. Markups are something that I think people feel like they know how to calculate it. They understand how it works. But I'd love for you to just kind of go through a really quick run through of what a markup is and why it's so important and how it applies to the difference between the cost of your items and the retail price you're going to sell the design for.
So with the markup, the standard is 3 to 4 times on flowers, right? So when you think of it, if you're doing a 3 times markup, right? One of those times is just getting paid for the flowers. It's just what you spent, right? Then you're getting the next 2 times are your actual markup. So a 3 times markup is actually a 200% markup, if that makes sense. A lot of times we just sort of shorthand it and say it's 300% because but you're just getting back, right? One of those percents, one of those 100% is what you already spent. So it's not profit yet. It's just being reimbursed. Okay. So that's really important to know. I'm sure this happens and makes you insane. Like it makes me insane when florists go, I do a 3 to 4% markup.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
Like constantly.
Right.
So it's not a percent, right? It's 3 to 4 times, which is 100. But like I just explained, one of those hundreds is reimbursing yourself for what you just spent. So you're only getting a 200% markup on that. This is why I'm obsessed with teaching focus on the profit margin, because you can mark up your stuff 5 times, but if you're overbuying, you're losing money every time. And that's again why EveryStem is like the best. The only app I recommend. People that you must own stock in EveryStem. No, but I should.
You should, yeah. We can talk about that later.
We'll have another conversation. No, but it really is like the simplest, quickest way to make sure before I place my order that I'm at 75% or 74% profit. Because when I'm using the app, when I'm putting in my numbers, when I'm following that 3 times markup, I can see right on the summary page how much profit I'm going to make based on this. So even if the flowers are more expensive this week, as long as I have, or, I got hot little fingers and I'm like, oh, I must have an extra bunch of spirea or whatever. Then, or like the other day, I was at my supplier and they had Lily of the Valley for $4 a stem. I wasn't going to buy the whole bunch, but they sold me half the bunch. You don't ask, don't get. So, you can have those moments where you're going to splurge on something because before you even go, you're focused on this profit margin. If you have higher overhead, you have more employees, you have more expenses, you may need a higher margin, which would mean then you need a higher markup or you need to spend less, right? You need to either get a better price, and or raise your price. So I think that answered, instead of just rambling on. I think that answered.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I try to use the same kind of thing that you just said. If you're using a 3 times markup and we're doing a $1 flower, we're multiplying that $1 times 3. That's our 3 times markup. So we're taking the $1 of the cost of the flower that's going to the wholesaler, and then we have $2 left to do what we need to do in our business, splitting that $2 up between overhead, expenses, and profit, however we see fit. And so I think it's really important, since you were talking about the relationship between the markup and the profit margin, that there is a direct correlation between what you're charging as your markup and what your profit margin is. And recently I posted a thing on Instagram. It was just like a little cheat sheet kind of guideline about the relationship between a 3 times markup is basically equivalent to a 67 or 68% profit margin. A 4 times markup is equivalent to like a 75% profit margin. And it was one of the most popular things I think I've ever posted, because I don't think that we've really been taught that as florists, or maybe we see it, but we don't really quite make that correlation. So I think it's really important for floral designers to know, if you're using a 3 times markup, you want to see at least a 68% profit margin. If you're using a 4 times markup, you want to see at least a 75% profit margin. If you're not seeing those numbers on EveryStem summary page, like Allison was just saying, that means your recipes are filled too high. You're putting too many flowers, too much product into those designs, and you're not achieving that profit margin. So understanding how those two things relate to each other, and knowing that we're using a 2 or a 2.5 times markup on our hard goods, that will affect it a little bit, right? Because we're multiplying those items by a little bit lower markup than we're multiplying our flowers or our greenery by. But overall, we want to achieve that number. And so I think a lot of times we fool ourselves. And I've seen this with several florists that I've been working with. And I want to call it out, because I'm not trying to make anybody feel like they don't, we're all learning. But if I say to myself, I'm using a 4 times markup, and if I go and talk to other floral designers and they say, what markup do you use? And I say, I use a 4 times markup. But then I go and put so many flowers into all of my recipes that I'm spending half of what I'm charging for each design, that is not a 4 times markup. I'm
Right.
only using a 2 times markup because I'm overfilling. So it's really important, I think, for us to understand that if we're choosing in our business and actively making a decision, I'm going to use a 3 times markup or I'm going to use a 4 times markup because that's what I need to make a profitable business, then I think it's really important for us to hold ourselves to those standards and be accountable, because a lot of times it is overbuying that can hurt us, because it's like we're pricing it right on the front end. We're just going way over when we go to actually fill the designs. And so with EveryStem, you can see at the bottom of each recipe if you have a negative difference. And if you have a negative difference based on the markups that you have in the system, that means you're going over your budget. So I think that's just a really important point. I don't know if you've seen that with people, Allison, that you've worked with.
Yes. Yes, like um all the time. And it's a lot of times because people put in their mind that they need to have a spending goal. Well, if my customer is spending, X amount, then I can spend this much. But that's the wrong way to think about it, because then we are always limiting our profit margin because we're always hitting a spending goal, right? It's like when some clients, this was like a big thing a while ago where there were some like higher end clients and I would see them coming in and they would kind of have some choices. They would go, parents are saying you can have this money and it's for your wedding and or your house and or whatever you want to do with it, right? So then people aren't just spending it all on the wedding. They're like, oh, maybe I do want to put some in the house, right? Florists are kind of like, oh, I just want to spend it all, instead of going, oh, but some of this could be for me. Keeping more of the money you're already making is the way I look at that. And my flower math motto, of course, is it doesn't matter what you charge if you overbuy. And so that's why, again, EveryStem is so great at this. And you posted about this the other day, the extras. So that's where, if you're looking and that profit margin isn't there, look at those extras every time, because it might not be that your recipe is overfilled so much. It could be more that you just have too many extras from the recipes that you made. So like, I think you used the example of like, if you need, 123 or 125 roses, or you need 127 roses and now you've ordered, 150, that's where if you've got 23 extra roses, that's where I'm immediately like, oh, we're going to take one of those bunches off. We're going to figure out where I've got something else extra. So I can't say more, like genuinely, how important it is to use the EveryStem app, put the recipe in. If a lot of times I do a little cheat for myself where I just leave some extra. So I've got $40 extra in that bridal bouquet, or, $10 extra per centerpiece, or whatever it might be. So that then again, if I get those hot little fingers, I can pick something and it's not going to tank me. But also, I don't owe it to my customer to spend a certain amount of money in order for that arrangement to be worth what it's worth. And I just want to add this as like a little, caveat or a little aside to that. So for example, if you're working with a 3 times markup, well, the range is 3 to 4. So you're within the range, right? Even if you didn't fill that thing all the way to the last penny, you're still within the range because you're already charging on the lower side. Now, I don't ever want to forget to mention that design fee piece, because the design fee is how, even if you are charging a 3 times markup and a 2 times markup on supplies, once you apply your design fee, that's how you're getting above that 67 or 68 range that you mentioned. We don't ever charge just a flat 3. Flat 3 is just for, I bought this rose for $1, I sell it to you for $3. But if I am wrapping it up, if I'm designing it for you, if I'm putting it in a big bouquet, right? That's time. And so you need to decide what you charge for your time. I have never worked at a flower shop that charged less than 32% for their design fee. And this is the other thing that makes me bonkers bananas is people throw 20% out all the time. 20% design fee. I don't know where they got this from. I literally have never, ever, 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 ever worked in a shop that charged less than 32%. And that's a 12% difference, which is big in a small business. And the last shop I worked in charged 37%. So I recommend 30 to 40% in my flower math course as being what you charge on everything. And again, that's where the beauty of EveryStem is for me. I can charge 40 on bouquets. I can charge 40 on centerpieces. I can charge 30% on cocktail arrangements because I'm really just using my extras and throwing them in some vases. So I don't have to go 40% on that if I don't want to, but I can if it's in the budget.
Right. And I
So
think it's so important to have that flexibility of understanding that the more intensive a design, the higher that design fee or labor fee can be on that particular installation, arrangement, bouquet, whatever it is. If you're doing a hand-tied bouquet and it's all, hydrangeas and roses, it might take you 10 minutes to make that. But if you're doing a wired bouquet with stephanotis and lily of the valley and all these things, it might take an hour to make that bouquet. So really being able to have that flexibility and understanding that that is adjustable per recipe in EveryStem, that you can kind of change that is really nice.
I think that is huge. I mean, I can't tell you how, I don't think there's ever an event where I charge the same design fee on every single thing I do. I change it around on everything. Corsages are 50%, like if it's a big installation, the labor is going to go up. If it's a big installation, I might even have some of that labor built into my delivery fee and my, installation. So it's not just in this piece. I'm getting it from a couple of different places so that overall it makes sense. I want to go back to what you said before, though, about like when doing big installations, making sure you're charging for the supplies and starting there. Because I think that, sometimes people know how to go from zero to a final price, but they don't know how to go from a price to the recipe, right? And so when we say, let's say we've quoted $1,000 for a hanging installation. By the way, I don't get up on a ladder for less than $1,000 at this point. And I'm not like some fancy florist, right? Like I do normal size weddings, give me a $3,000 to $5,000 wedding. I'm more than happy. A little bigger is fine too. But I'm not gonna, get up on a ladder if you don't have $1,000, right? For the time, me coming back, I'm gonna have to come back the next day. Like there's stuff that goes into this. So I don't really have to do a whole recipe to know that you must be this tall to ride the ride, right? We have to be at least $1,000 before I'm getting up on that ladder. But when I'm figuring out whether it is a hanging installation or a centerpiece, I'm always taking off the cost of my container first. And that's how I teach it in flower math too. I personally don't charge a design fee on my container unless you made the container, right? So like I mentioned the workshop we did here in April. Hitomi came, was amazing. And she taught us all these like amazing structures and things. I've got these new tools, these new tricks that are going to enhance the perceived value of things that I've done, right? Because now I've got new tricks, I've got a new structure, I've got a new something that I can charge for, right? That is something that I can take off the top and I know, okay, here's how much I'm getting paid for my awesome mechanics and my labor and the fact that I know how to do this and you don't, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, right? But that's the truth. I know how to do it and you don't. And so that's why you pay me. It's not, well, anybody can do this. Because sure, anybody can do this, just like anybody can bake a cake, right? Can all of you here bake a cake? Sure. Would you do it for a wedding and deliver it on time and be responsible for making sure the buttercream's not melting and all that? I would not. And that's why you pay somebody big bucks to do that, right? So, we just want to make sure we're always keeping in mind the way that the pieces come together. And again, that's why EveryStem is just the bee's knees, because you can change those design fees. You can put in your retail price on what you're charging for your containers. And now you see what you've got to work with, and you can work backwards from there too. So it's really important to be able to know your recipes backwards and forwards in terms of how do we price them this way and how do we price them backwards? Because can I say sucks? It sucks to not feel totally confident in the value you're providing to your client. Because I'm always on the like 70% or more, like that's your profit margin, right? Go, 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 rah, rah, rah. But just like you could charge a 5 times markup, but still be losing money because you're overspending, right? Like you can be marking up and making your profit margin, but if the client is like, every time, it's kind of small, it's less than I expected, it's not what I thought we talked about, or even worse, I wish you had told me, I would have paid more, dagger to the heart, right? If only I had known, I would have added more to the budget. We have to make the client happy too. And so when you're walking out the door, you can be like, yep, filled to value. And then you start to get nervous. Oh, is the mom going to like this? Are they going to think this is full enough? Just add some more, add 3 more roses to every centerpiece. And all of a sudden there goes the profit, right? So that's why these pieces and just knowing how they layer, so that now I'm remembering why I kind of wanted to jump in before. When you're talking about like the expensive stuff, like the stephanotis or like the lily of the valley, right? So there's an interesting fork in the road too. And I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on this. It's easy to go, okay, well then it's a 3 times markup. Okay, so then each of those stems is $12 for a stem this big, right? Then I'm going to charge my labor. This is where you might get creative if you know how your pricing comes together. I want to know, how much do I get paid for my labor on a bridal bouquet, for example, on a wedding bouquet? So we'll stick with bride for now. On a bridal bouquet, if I'm getting 40% of the $250 or the $275 or the $350 or whatever it is that you charge, what is that amount? And that's how much I'm making for labor. So as long as I'm getting paid that for my labor, and yes, I want to get my markup on my flowers, but do I really want to tell my client this bouquet is $2,000 and it looks like I literally just went outside and did this? Or is there a way where I can be like, okay, I'm still reaching my overall profit margin, even if I'm not like, these are $16 a stem for these lily of the valley. Like I could not even imagine. I can't even tell you how small they were, right? Small as can be at $4 a stem. Either the client can't afford it, right? That can be a way that you look at it. Or you can figure out, how do you make it work for you where you are still making what you need to make, even if you might not be making your full 3 or 4 times markup on those, whatever it is, 30 stems, right? Is that going to kill you? Maybe it will, by the way.
Right. Yeah. And I
That's
think that's a
why
good point. Yeah.
you can see in the labor fee, you can see in the profit margin summary whether that bouquet tanked you, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to know, like, you can adjust those. So if you're deciding in an event, that particular event, maybe you want to lower the markup on a certain variety of flower that the client feels super compelled to have, those are like kind of, I don't know if the right word is, like a little bit more advanced techniques that the more experience you gain as a floral designer and having the right tools, like a software like EveryStem, where you can make those more sophisticated adjustments and you're not just going by a base number, then you can start to kind of say, okay, I'm gaining traction in my business is growing, people are asking me for things that are maybe a little bit more luxurious, a little bit more above and beyond, or this client wants something very particular. Overall, when you look at that summary page on EveryStem, if you're looking at an entire event, maybe you have a bride who wants, or a client who wants, Phalaenopsis orchids or lily of the valley in just a few key pieces of a wedding overall. Do you put those under your secondary markup and maybe lower that markup a little bit, but you're still doing that, you're still getting your labor, you're still getting your, design fee. So those are things that having a tool like EveryStem, that's where the superficial benefits start to kind of, okay, I love placing my orders using EveryStem. I love building a recipe using EveryStem, but really starting to understand how you can, manipulate some of those things and getting that feedback from the software and looking at the total summary and saying, I'm making a 75% profit margin on this wedding, even though there are a few key, floral ingredients that maybe I'm doing at a slightly lower markup, but it's a $10,000 wedding. And overall, I am achieving my profit margin goal. That's where a little more of a deep dive starts to happen. And you can really start to, build some momentum with some, maybe higher end clients. And I don't like to encourage necessarily a lot of designers to go and lower their markups, because what happens is sometimes we end up going down that slippery slope of,
Totally agree.
oh, well, now I'll do it for this client and this client and this client. And before you know it, that profit margin starts to slide. But if you're using EveryStem and you can really see that profit margin on your summary page and you're making good decisions, then yeah, that flexibility exists because the software is so customizable and you can make those adjustments.
Yeah, you want to be able to make smart choices around where we need to make the margin, right? Like little things, even like a flower girl wand or something. Like I don't know what I was trying. I had like a placeholder of like $55 or something for a flower girl wand. And well, I think we didn't know what it was going to be yet. But like I can work with that. I don't need to lower that price now that it's not going to be a basket, right? But it's so either that money that's left over will go somewhere else, right? Like we have that flexibility built in there just to build on really the idea of not lowering the markup. Like I really appreciate that you said that. Like I don't lower my markup really ever.
Right.
But there are these moments, right? There is like you said, the person who's coming to you with this all lily of the valley bouquet is a 10,000 plus wedding, right? If not, they just can't afford it and it's not your problem. But that's who they are. I have never done a lily of the valley bouquet for someone who didn't spend like $17,000 on their flowers. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Overall, it's going to make it worth your while. Yeah.
So that's where like we don't want to lose the client because we're putting out a proposal with a $1,000 bridal bouquet because we're kind of nickeling and diming them here on, well, I am so stuck. I have to charge a 3 times markup. So this has to be this much, right? Alternatively, what about gardenias? Let's say they want something with gardenias. Oh, girl, you better charge more because you have to order them in threes. You cannot touch them or look at them wrong or they will brown. You will have to order extras just in case. And so you have to, right? So again, this is where we want to understand it in our bones, right? Like in our muscles, in our bones, like we flex these muscles. This is why I made flower math. This is why you made EveryStem, so that you can say, okay, what's the difference in time between making you a lily of the valley bouquet, and I'm going to charge you $1,000 for that, versus if I needed to add 6 gardenias, it will take me longer to put those 6 gardenias in a bouquet than to make you a huge lily of the valley bouquet. You hardly have to do a thing to it. I'm not trying to put us down, but let's be real, gorgeous. You're just like, look at it.
It stands alone. Yeah. And I think it's important with that in mind of understanding what our costs are, understanding the things that are important to the entire piece, those non-negotiables, whether we look at it kind of from the way I was describing it or the way Allison was describing it, or looking at it with both in mind, because that's really important. They're all pieces that we need to pay for. The higher your markup is, the less you can spend on flowers. Technically, that's how the math works. And that's important to understand. If I do a 3 times markup, if I'm doing an arrangement for $100, I can take 1/3 of that $100 and spend it on flowers. But if I do a 5 times markup, I can only take 1/5 of that $100 and spend it on flowers. If I do a 7 times markup, I can only spend a 1/7 of that $100. So that's where Allison was saying, finding that, striking that healthy balance between giving the client enough perceived value to make them happy, because that's our ultimate goal, is to make our client happy, but also to make a healthy profit margin. And so I think it was Lee recently, I think Lee's on here. She's amazing. Hi, Lee. She was saying, is the 70% profit margin like a standard, 70% profit margin is a standard because we don't want you all to go on that slippery slope down lower and lower and lower. And so 70% is an ideal number that Allison and I both believe if you stick to that, you're going to be able to be profitable. But that does not mean that that has to be your number.
It's a floor. I consider it the floor. You want to make 70% or more.
Right.
So that's where I say, like, sorry to step on you, but I just, because I want to like echo it before you even finish it.
Yeah.
That it's not, we're not capping you at 70. Like, there are plenty of weddings where I make 74, 78, 81. If I'm renting lots of candles and I've like rented them before, or, I could easily be at an 81% margin. So you too can be above that 70. That's where, but it is a base. And I just want to add this, and I'm going to throw it back at you. We both, because you said, like, we both endorse this 70% baseline, which we do, but also so does every floral designer that I have talked with independently, right? Like, before I even made Flower Math, I would talk to, like Alicia from Flirty Fleurs, and be like, it's like a 70% profit margin. She would be like, dead on, exactly, right? So like Luann and I didn't conspire and talk, and I made Flower Math and she made EveryStem, and they are the same. We didn't talk. I mean, I knew you, but we didn't talk, and her app works seamlessly with Flower Math. It's not a coincidence, right? So when we talk about, is this the standard? Like, absolutely yes. And it's not just you and me, even though we're the loudest talking about it. I confirm it with people who know how to price. And I want to really, again, reiterate that I've confirmed it with people who know how to price, not just people who do big weddings and have great Instagram accounts, because those are different things. So I'll throw it back to you. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And if anybody has any questions about that, pop it in the chat. Melissa did put something in here, and I love it. I want to just go back to it real quick, and then we can go to our next thing. She said, the best advice I've ever gotten from Luann was to add a fun bunch into my EveryStem recipes so that I'm covered when I'm at the market and I see something that I want to add. So I think that's really important. Actually, a designer named Ashley Fox, who uses EveryStem, is the one that came up with that. So I don't want to take full credit for it, but she actually created an item in her EveryStem library that's called like MVP flower or fun bunch, whatever you want to call it. Put it in at a fairly high price. Put it in at, $24.99 a bunch or whatever you want to do. And then when you want to slot in a flower that is something you want to, maybe put in a few of the bouquets, maybe you want to put it in some of the, overhead arrangements, maybe you want to put it in an installation or a welcome sign, you can just add that generic item, and then it'll add it up for you and say, okay, you can do 6 bunches of your fun bunch, and it has to be $24.99 or less per bunch. Then when you go to the market, you're not overbuying. And then the other option would be to do it the way Allison does it, which is to leave a positive difference at the bottom of every recipe. So when you're looking at your EveryStem recipe, if you look down the column at the very bottom, there's a difference number. And that's the difference between what you should be charging And if you enter the price you're charging in the quoted price box, what you are charging. So it's very important to enter that price that you're charging in the quoted price box. It's going to show you, maybe you have a $25 positive difference or a $40 positive difference. And that's going to total up on the summary page as well. So there's kind of two different ways to do that. You can create an item that, we call, you can call it a fun bunch and put it in there. I think that's a really nice way to do it, especially for designers who are a little newer, because then you're really putting in the true cost, you're adding it up in your recipe, it's telling you your total, you can achieve kind of getting close to a zero difference without kind of, worrying about that. For somebody who's more experienced, like Allison, leaving a positive difference is also a great way to do it. But I think having those options is really nice. And with EveryStem, it's fairly simple and customizable. So you could try it one way, and if you don't like it that way, try it the other way. But I think keeping our creativity open and available to us, and if we see something beautiful at the market, not being forced into, oh, I only had this much, I spent it all. So when Melissa says I'm putting in my fun bunch, it's because she's creative. She wants to make beautiful things. We all do. So giving ourselves that flexibility, I think is really super important. So
I
I just
love that.
wanted
I'm
to
going to
get that.
add a fun bunch to my library because I can see how that could come in really handy. Then even when you're there, you can go, I need to buy 5 bunches. And it can be anything. It could be that crazy butterfly ranunculus that I got. That was ridiculous, 27.99 a bunch or whatever. But
Yeah. But if you
but
love it
yeah.
and you feel compelled to add it and you think it's going to be something that's going to be like, this makes this client's dreams come true. And you know what? If that flower doesn't exist at the market, I used to go to my local flower company and sometimes they had amazing things and sometimes it was like, a little bit less than. Well, then I can
Yep,
just buy more of whatever's already on my recipe and put it
exactly.
out.
Add an extra bunch of roses, add a couple bunch of sweet pea, whatever it is. I'm going to do that. I'm going to add fun bunch. I love that tip.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, which was something I posted about when I posted about the extras the other day on Instagram that Allison, you just mentioned a little bit ago. When you use EveryStem, if you're doing weddings and events or you're doing a holiday like Mother's Day and you're kind of building an order for that particular event, we talked about the extras and the cost of the extras, and that if our profit margin is a little lower than we want it to be, we can look at those extras and try to cut down on them to increase our profit margin. So if you use more of the flowers that are listed as extras, then into your recipes, your profit margin is going to naturally go up. But the other thing that's really important to know is that if your profit margin is healthy, where you want it to be, 70% or above, as we were just saying, you can use every single flower that's on that order, including the extras. The extras cost is included in that profit margin calculation. So those are the flowers you're going to pull off to the side. Like I recommend to everybody that I talk to, pull those extras when you're processing, put them in a separate bucket. And then when it's time to do the designs or go to the venue and fluff everything, you know that those flowers can be used to kind of fill the holes, fill in for broken stems and things like that. So I just think that's important because I know a lot of times people talk about not charging for the extras or not accounting for the extras or how
Mhm.
much breakage do I have? And I think in the course of like a wedding, if a rose breaks, I know Allison has said this before, I'm going to steal her line. I can put a piece of stock, a stem of stock in place of that rose, or I could put an anemone in place of that rose. Like it doesn't have to be that exact flower. So as long as you have enough extras that you feel comfortable, you can use every single stem. That's why we named it EveryStem
Yeah.
in your designs and feel comfortable about that. So I just think that's important because a lot of times when we're doing this work by hand, we're not calculating the cost of those extras. And so that's
Yes.
why our profit margin tends to be lower. One of the other reasons why our profit margin tends to be lower than it really should be, right?
I want to just add on to that. I think when I would always do my recipes by hand, I would always make a note of how many extra I had, but just like you said, I wasn't necessarily calculating it. But that is a question that I get a lot is how many extras should I buy? And so I like the way that you kind of just encapsulated that, like if the extras are already in that profit margin. So this is, I'm sure you guys as users of EveryStem do this too, but when I see that profit margin is at, let's just say it's at like 65, right? Because I'm just sort of throwing stuff in there. Then I'll go, okay, I'll look at my extras and I'll see what's extra. And then I might take off an entire variety of something because I'm just going to use more roses or use more stock or whatever it is, right? But knowing that it's in your total profit margin, you really can have confidence that as long as you're at 70% or more, it's okay if you have those extras, like Luann just said. But when people ask me, like, what percentage extra, like, I'm kind of going for zero, like, right?
The least amount
So
possible.
that's, like, I'm not like, oh, well, if I have a $4,000 wedding, I want to have 40 extra stems or something. I don't want to have any extra stems. What I want to do is order what I need, use the very best of that, design something beautiful, deliver it on time, do what's expected, right? I want to do all the other things because my value isn't directly tied to how many roses went in this. Okay. My value is tied to from the minute they first talked to me to the customer service they got to all of these things. And so if I'm, didn't buy enough extras because if I broke a flower, I'm still okay. Right. Unless
Exactly.
it's literally damaging the perceived value of an arrangement, which would then mean you're not charging enough overall. And that would be a whole nother talk, but
Right. And I think it's important that all ties together, right? Because we were just talking about how does this, I think a lot of times people think that pricing is some subset of their flower business. And
yeah.
it's really not. Because if we aren't, like what Allison just said, if I am not pricing enough to build a recipe that is full enough to fulfill what my client wants, then I'm going to have issues with customer satisfaction. It's going to lead into markets. It leads into everything. So I think it's really important to understand that not having any extras is tied to charging enough for our designs that we're building recipes that are robust enough to satisfy the client's desires, right? So that all ties back in. And Lee just put a good comment on here. She said, in my experience, I don't think we should buy extras on purpose. Just whatever is in our extras can be backup if a stem breaks or if you need an extra bud vase or something. So I think that's really important to understand. I have a lot of people who ask me, how can I build in extras? If you feel like you're doing a wedding where the client is super particular or the design, it's going to be 95 degrees outside in Texas in August or whatever, and we really feel like we need backup, that's when you're going to build that in either to the price of each design and build fuller recipes because you want to have those extras built in, or you're going to say to the client, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and charge you $500, $1,000 for an abundance of flowers that we're going to fill in on site as needed. We're not going to say in case things break. We're just going to say this is going to fill everything in and make it look extra beautiful. And then you can build a column or a recipe in EveryStem for that particular thing. But really, our recipes should be robust enough to fill our clients' desires. And if one rose breaks, like Allison said, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to, that one rose is not going to make or break that design from the client's perspective. They don't know there are 16 roses in that arrangement and now there are only 15 roses. We should all be skilled enough to be able to make 15 or 16 roses look pretty equal when we look at it. So the last thing, I know we're getting close to an hour. So there was one more question I had that I really wanted to get your opinion on because a lot of people are talking about price transparency with
Yeah.
new generations of wedding clients. And I just did a really great Zoom with quite a few EveryStem members. It was probably one of our better ones that I've ever done. And we talked about doing a la carte offerings in EveryStem. Because clients want price transparency, having some sort of information about pricing on your website, whether it's an a la carte offering or it's some description on a blog post about this is what you can get for $3,000 or $10,000 or whatever with us, using EveryStem to kind of establish some of those base prices and understand what you're charging, especially as a newer designer where you haven't really established that yet, I think can help. It can help with your marketing. It can help with your sales strategy. It can help with your own establishing your own value and understanding that, yes, I'm worth the money that you're charging me, having that issue. I know Allison likes to call it money shoes. Like some people are willing to spend more, some people are willing to spend less, but that's not up to us. It's up to the client. So understanding how that kind of all ties together, feeling confident in your pricing and being more transparent to the client without telling them, I paid 16 cents for this piece of tape and I paid $2 for this rose. Like, how are you feeling about that? And how do you feel like kind of really having that sense of clarity in your pricing makes that all easier to communicate to your client?
So the first thing that came to my mind when you said the transparency thing is like a cringe moment of like people using transparency and pricing as social media content. So I think that these are different things. So for example, we've got people who are, excuse me, who are making content where they're like, here's what went into, look how hard I work, right? Here's what went into making this arrangement. And then even breaking down the recipe and the wholesale price and all of these things, like you said, this is how much I spent on tape. Whether you're talking about that or having just a page on your website that talks about pricing, these are marketing decisions. Okay. So anytime we are putting pricing out there in like a public facing way, it's a marketing decision. It's either to deter, which is really an important thing that people don't talk enough about. When we're putting pricing up, for the most part, what we're trying to do is have people self-select, right? It's like it's like our own form of Darwinism, right? We put our pricing up and then you go, oh, nope, bye. It's not meant to be like a net that captures people. It's not a magnet. Pricing doesn't draw people to you. It's there to put up a little wall, a little screen, a little barrier, a little hurdle to say, again, you must be this high to ride the ride. And the truth is that I think I am always transparent on pricing with the clients who are interested enough to actually have a call with me, have a conversation with me, then they will get my transparent pricing. But it's a really important decision that you're making, whether you're using it to create content because of the social media pressure that you must be creating content instead of reaching out to real customers in your community. But that's another talk for another day. But, you know, if we're really trying to put out a facade about our pricing, you want to think, I always go back to what's our intention? Is my intention to make sure that no one contacts me unless they have a budget of $5,000 or more? Or is my intention for somebody to like really like trust me and contact me, and then I can hit them with my pricing? So those are things that I think are just the most important thing about the transparency thing is like the why. Why are you trying to be transparent? Why are you talking about your pricing like this? And I do agree, like EveryStem is the place to go to just enter in. Like if you're not sure what should a starting price be for a wedding, even if you don't put it on your website, right? You can head over there, enter in the prices and see, okay, we've got this many tables, this many people, this many, here's what a minimum would be. And then you just hit them with that minimum, again, with interested customers, unless you're trying to put up a wall to deter people.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an interesting perspective because for a lot of designers who are maybe just getting into weddings or trying to understand, you know, what they need to do to attract clients right now, I know everybody's been saying for a while now, like inquiries are down a little bit, sales are
Yeah.
down a little bit, overall weddings are down a little bit. And then I'll have, new people join EveryStem and they'll say, well, this really isn't for me right now. When my business grows, I'll come back to this and I'll circle around and I'll make this a focus at that point. And I think that the most successful florists that I have seen, and I see a lot of florists, I know Allison does too, they make pricing a priority from the very beginning of their experience with Floral. So I feel like it's really, important to understand that if you want to talk to a client and engage with a client, if they're interested in you, if you've done enough marketing work to get people calling you or reaching out to you via email or whatever source if you don't know what you're going to charge for, and it's going to take you a week, or you're guessing, or you just don't know, like, those clients are going to sense that and they're going to be totally turned off. Nobody wants to go to someone who's supposed to be a professional, no matter how much experience they have. If you're putting yourself out there, I'm a professional florist, I'm selling you these beautiful flower arrangements on one of the most important days of your entire life, your wedding day, but I have no idea what I'm going to charge you, and it's going to take me 2 weeks to create a proposal, and then I'm going to be kind of wishy-washy about it. That's why understanding whether you use a software like EveryStem or you do it by hand or whatever it is, getting those ideas of what you need to charge for, at least the most common designs in a wedding, or the most common retail designs if you're doing retail, it really does transfer through every aspect of the business. I don't know one part of my business that isn't affected by understanding, being clear, and being confident about my pricing. So I think that's important, but I just want to kind of get your take on that, Allison, kind of as we wrap up. Like, what would you say to people who are saying, I'm going to deal with my pricing later after my business grows?
Well, as the creator of flower math, I will say, honestly, it blows my mind, right? It blows my mind. Like, I had this conversation with a floral designer not too long ago, and she bought flower math. We scheduled this one-on-one consultation, and I was like, the name was familiar, like she's been in my life,
Mm-hmm.
And she bought my course a long time ago, but she didn't implement it. And so what she's been doing is she has like a pretty sweet account with like a big resort, and she's basically making barely 50% on it. She's spending 50%. Oh, well, it's an account that's, $4,000, so I spend 2,000, I spend 500 a week on flowers. So I know we all just had a moment of mourning, but she's been doing this for years, right? Like, this is a lot of money that you're losing all along the way. And so this is why we don't want to wait to figure this out until later. Like, we want to know now how we get to that 70% or more on every single order. I would argue on a hotel order, it should be even more, because you're reusing the base mechanics every week. You have this like a well-oiled machine, right? Like, that's what we want to get to eventually. That would be the goal. So just really quickly, because it ties in, I sort of came up with this little sort of like, imagine like stairs stepping up, and it's the 4 fundamentals of floralpreneur. To be a floralpreneur, we have to know how to design, take care of the flowers. Then we have to know how to price for profit. Then we need to know how to book the client. And then we need to know how to build our brand position so we become the obvious choice. And I don't have my visual here, but there's steps, right? We know how to design, we know how to price, we get better at booking clients, then our brand position gets better. But then the beauty of this is it also, there's steps down as well, because our brand position's better. Now it's easier to book clients, we can charge more, and our designs are better because of all of these pieces coming together. So like, that's what it really comes down to. We can't be, I'm great at design, but I'm not great at pricing, or I know how to price, but I'm not great at client communication, right? All of these things have to come together so that we're meeting expectations all along the way. We meet expectations so that we can wow. If we fall short, we can't wow them later. And that pricing piece is, aside from, yes, you need to know how to do the flowers, right? Like that's, I'm never going to say it's more important to know how to price than how to actually do the flowers. That's got to be the first step. But the very next step is you've got to know how to price right away in your business, or else you won't be able to pay yourself. It's really just that simple. So if you want to pay yourself, get that pricing part figured out, and then everything else starts to come into place and it starts to get easier. You just keep building and building, and you're up and down the stairs from there. Up and down. We're making better designs. We're charging more. We're booking better clients. They're super excited to work with us because we came so highly recommended, and on and on and on.
Yeah, I love that. I think that idea of those steps is really great. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can unmute or you can pop them in the chat. We'll give Allison a few more minutes. I know we've taken over an hour of her time already today.
Oh,
Thank you guys for all
totally
being
fine.
here. I think that's one of the things with using a software or kind of having a really good system. I freelance a lot, and I deal with designers who don't use a system. They don't necessarily write recipes, and there's consistently an inconsistency between
Mm.
having way too much or having not enough. And that's something that we can all continue to work on, right? When you see that in a business, you know that's an opportunity for improvement. That doesn't mean, oh, well, I'm a foregone, my whole business is a loss. I could never. We can always make these changes, but we do need to make it a priority, sit down and spend some time kind of really understanding the fundamentals so that then we can kind of go up those steps, like Allison was saying.
Well, and I think when you know what you're aiming for, and if you have the EveryStem app, it's pretty straightforward, right? If we know what we're aiming for, we know how these pieces come together, we know how we apply our markup, we know how we apply our design fee, we know how much we're charging for supplies, we know what that final price is going to be, we know that we're not going to overbuy, then it's just like it's sort of on autopilot. Like, and I never like to think of anything as being on autopilot in my business. That's why I'm like, check your website every few months, right? You just never know, like all kinds of things we want to check. But when it comes to pricing, because I've never doubted how to price, I've always known the building blocks of pricing. I have always turned a profit in my business. Even when I just did some weekly accounts, I was never losing money in my business. And so that's what we want to always keep in mind. I talk to, like you, a lot of floral designers, and some of them, I was just talking about this in a chat I did last week on YouTube on accountability. But someone asked in my group about like, how much can a florist make? Like, will I ever be able to make this work? And it really depends. I talked to plenty of florists who are paying themselves $40,000, and then some who are paying themselves 70, or like that's their goal this year. And then there are those though that are not paying themselves at all or barely. And so when we go, oh, well, the average is, 40 or 50 or whatever you want to say for your area, there's all these other people who are they're off the scale, right? Because they're not getting anything. And so you really need to be mindful of this. What looks like a successful business on the outside is sometimes struggling on the inside, living off of their partner's paycheck because they're not getting paid. So always just keep your eyes on your own paper and on that profit margin, because if you do that, then you know that you're going to be able to pay your bills, unless you're vastly overspending, right? Unless you really have some crazy overhead, you've got a lot of staff. Then it comes into a whole nother ball game of balancing out the quantity of work you do, the number of people that are required, right? That's a whole nother thing. And hopefully that's nobody here, because this would be that That's a
Right.
lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, but I think Allison, you've got a good point. I was talking to one of our EveryStem members recently, and she had sent me an email asking about what was going on in her business was that she was noticing other florists in her area were about the same price as her on a lot of the, standard designs, bouquets, centerpieces, this and that. But then she noticed on some of the larger installations that she had just started quoting that she was charging a little bit less than what some of these other designers were charging. And so she was like, I just don't know if I'm doing this right or not. And so I kind of, emailed her. We were going back and forth in email, and I emailed her back and I said, first of all, one thing that's really important to kind of call out is, do you know how these other people are pricing? Are they just kind of going with the standard status quo, and then on an installation, they're just charging way more and maybe they can get away with that? Because also, we don't want to just way overcharge our clients either. We want to charge a fair amount. So I reminded her, if you're using the software and you're building your markup into the price of the design and you're adding your design fee on top of that, and you're getting to a price, it doesn't really matter what anyone else is charging. Now, you want to be competitive in your market. You want to know what other people are doing. Yes. But if they're way overcharging because they're not using a system or they're just guessing, and you're doing it accurately, and you're seeing that 70% or higher profit margin, and you're able to book that client, then you're winning because you're doing it right. So she said, one of the things she wrote back was, I'm so glad that I can actually say to my clients, I use a proven formula. I use a software to calculate my prices. And so that way they're understanding that not only do you know what you're doing because you're using a proven formula, you're using a software, they understand that this isn't like a guesstimation or we're just going to charge whatever we want. They get to understand, oh, okay, this person really is doing this for a reason. They have a formula behind it, and you're going to get a lot less pushback on pricing from clients. And so I think that was great that she was like, I feel like I can just say to people, I use a formula, I use a software, and this is where I get my pricing from. So I think that's, something that's really important, and that's transparency, right? In its own way. You're not telling them the rose costs $2, but you're telling them, this is what I need to do to run a healthy, profitable business, to make you happy for the design you want, and to be able to stay in business for myself. And that balance is what we're all trying to achieve overall.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I don't think nobody has any questions. I can't believe it. Okay. No questions in the chat. Any
They know
last
what to do.
chance?
They know what to do. They're like, I got the app. I know what to do.
They've got it all down. Well, hopefully everybody found this helpful. Allison, you are always just so knowledgeable, and I appreciate your matter of fact and your kind of just honest, experience, and how you share the realities of floral design with us. There's no sugarcoating, which I appreciate, because a lot of times we get into this business and we think, oh, it's all fun and games and flowers, but that's only a very small part of it, as we all know.
Well, and it is something where it's easy to say, charge what you're worth, but I think it's easier to believe it when I'm like, I do this too. Like, I don't just teach it, I do it. I follow these formulas. I'm using EveryStem in my business. I'm using it for my weddings this summer. I don't know what I'd do without it at this point. But it's something where it's easy to talk about these things from a distance, but it's nice to know, like, even just you with your freelance experience at this point, to see in real life where the difference between the people who follow the recipe or the people who have way too many or not enough. I don't even know what's worse. I couldn't even pick, because that's not how I work, right? Like, I want to know that I'm, like you said, when you're hiring a professional, I know what it costs. I know what you're getting, and I'm doing my very best where I'm showing up and I'm feeling confident. That's all that we can ask for, because there's enough pressure. Everything is stressful and there's so many decisions. You can't also be like, is this enough? Is this full enough? Like, EveryStem or Flower Math tells you it's full enough.
Exactly. And I think that's that clarity, understanding that, having that confidence. And that doesn't happen from doing one wedding, right? We need to make this a practice. Just like Allison was saying earlier, the base is floral design. Obviously, we need to be skilled at what we do. Our craft is floral design. We need to practice that regularly. We also need to be able to be proficient in pricing and all these other things. So practicing it regularly, is really important. Just doing it one time is not going to cut it. I mean, we've been both are, very experienced designers. We've been doing this for, 20 plus years. And so for the people who are newer, just keep practicing, get into EveryStem, or if you've bought flower math, or you want to buy flower math as the class, follow the samples that Allison has and practice and keep doing it. Because I think, as many of the members here, like Melissa or Lee, they would say, now that I've used EveryStem over an extended period of time, I feel so much more comfortable and confident using it regularly. It's just like anything else. It's practice makes progress, So we just need to keep pushing forward. And then we get to that point where, maybe it's not exactly on autopilot, but that we feel that confidence level where we're just running through it. And maybe we're checking, making sure we're making our profit. We're checking, making sure our markups don't need to be raised for next season. But other than that, we're just, running through it very smoothly.
Love that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll let you go. And Allison, thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll talk to you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.